My parents forbade me from speaking to any non-family member. My entire life, calling outsiders poison. When I told them I could translate for a deaf witness who'd seen a hit and run, my dad grabbed my shoulders and said, "We are not involved in worldly affairs." I ripped free without a word. That was a year ago. Last week, he saw my interview on the evening news. My parents homeschooled me and forbade speaking to any non-family member ever. Growing up, I thought everyone lived like we did. When they went grocery shopping, we waited in the car with the doors locked and windows up. If anyone walked by, we had to look down at our laps. Eye contact with strangers was forbidden. Mom said outsiders would poison our minds, and Dad backed her up with Quran verses about being separate from the world. The only people I ever spoke to were my parents and sister Rachel. This rule destroyed any chance of normal development. By age 16, I could barely function in required state testing situations. The testing proctor would ask me simple questions, and I would freeze up completely. My hands would shake and sweat would drip down my face. The only outside person I saw regularly was our mail carrier Archie. He showed up like clockwork, 2 in the afternoon, every single day. He was 15 years older than me, but I was still fantasizing about our life together. That's what boredom does to you. One day he caught me looking, and instead of telling my parents, he smiled and waved, like it was nothing. I immediately ducked down terrified, but he just kept delivering mail like nothing happened. The next day he waved again. After a week of this, he started making these weird movements with his hands. Not quite waving, something else. At first I thought maybe he had some kind of condition or something, but then it clicked. He would point at our oak tree, then his fingers would bloom upward like branches. He'd gesture at his mail truck, then ball his fists and pump them forward like he was driving. He was teaching me an entire secret language through the window, and I became obsessed. This went on for months. Archie would spend an extra minute or two at our mailbox showing me new signs. I practiced in my room constantly. Rachel caught me once, and I taught her too. We'd argue, joke, share secrets, all in perfect silence. My parents never suspected because we'd gotten so good at switching to statue mode the second we heard footsteps. They actually complimented us at dinner one night about how we'd stopped bickering. One Tuesday afternoon, my world stopped. I was practicing signs in my room when the sound ripped through everything. Screeching tires, then that thud. That specific wrong thud that you know means something terrible. I ran to the window and my brain couldn't process what I saw at first. A small body, flying through the air. A little boy landed hard on the pavement as a white Hyundai sped away. Blood pooled under his head. People started screaming and running toward him. I pressed my face against the glass hard enough to leave marks, trying to see if his chest was moving at all. That's when I noticed a woman standing frozen on the sidewalk. She was frantically signing and pointing at the fleeing car, but she might as well have been invisible. Nobody understood her. She kept spelling out letters and numbers, but everyone just stared like she was having some kind of breakdown. My whole body shook as it hit me. She saw the plate. She knew who did this. She was trying to tell them, but her words were trapped in her hands. The boy still hadn't moved. Someone was yelling about calling 911. The deaf woman kept signing the same sequence over and over. BR7492. She saw the plate number but couldn't communicate it. I knew those signs. Archie had taught me letters and numbers last month. My parents' rules thundered in my ears, but that little boy was dying. There wasn't time to be scared. I sprinted downstairs where Mom was teaching Rachel mathematics. "There's been an accident," I gasped. "A hit and run. A boy got hit." Mom jumped up and I saw her shift into lockdown mode instantly. "Stay inside. Do not go out there." She moved toward the window and I knew the second she saw that crowd we'd be barricaded in for days. "Mom, please. There's a deaf witness. She saw the license plate but no one understands her. I know sign language. I can help." The words crashed out of me in a desperate rush. "You know what? How could you possibly know that?" Her face transformed. Confusion, then understanding, then pure fury. "Have you been communicating with outsiders?" Dad came running from his office. "What's happening?" Through the window we could see paramedics arriving. The boy was so still. Too still. The deaf woman was crying now, her signs getting sloppier, more desperate, still trying to tell anyone who would look at her. "Your daughter has been secretly learning sign language." Mom spat. "She wants to go talk to strangers." "Please," I screamed. "That boy is dying and she saw who did it. No one else can understand her. Please let me help." Dad grabbed my shoulders hard. "You deliberately disobeyed us. You put this entire family at risk of contamination." His fingers dug into my skin. "We are not involved in worldly affairs." I wrenched away from him and ran for the door. Mom shrieked behind me, but I didn't stop. I burst outside for the first time in years without permission. The sunlight felt alien on my skin. People turned to stare as I ran barefoot across our yard. The deaf woman saw me approaching and started signing frantically. I signed back, "I understand you," and her eyes went wide. "License plate," she signed. "BR7492, white Hyundai, Michigan plates." I spun toward the nearest adult. The words felt strange in my mouth after years of silence. "BR7492, white Hyundai, Michigan plates." I managed to get out to the nearest cop who grabbed his radio immediately and started calling it in while the paramedics worked on Lucas's still form. The deaf woman, Diana, grabbed my hands and signed "thank you" over and over with tears streaming down her face as more police cars arrived and officers started taking statements from everyone. I stood there shaking as reality crashed down on me that I'd just broken every rule my parents had ever made, but Lucas was being loaded into an ambulance and that mattered more than anything else. Mom yanked me back inside so hard my shoulder popped and Dad slammed the door behind us while Rachel watched from the stairs with huge eyes. They screamed at me for 20 minutes straight about contamination and disobedience and how I destroyed our family's purity, but I just kept seeing Lucas's blood spreading on the asphalt. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of punishment and isolation, where they took away my window privileges and made me copy religious texts for 12 hours a day, while news vans parked outside our house because somehow word got out that a homeschooled girl had helped solve a hit and run. Diana found my number somehow and started texting me updates about Lucas, who survived, but with severe brain damage that would need years of therapy, and she mentioned his mom was desperate for answers since the police said they couldn't find the car with those plates. That's when everything shifted because we were packing boxes for our punishment move to a smaller house, when I noticed our new neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, had security cameras all along her driveway, pointing directly at the street where Lucas got hit. I signed to Rachel about the cameras while pretending to pack dishes, and she immediately understood what that could mean for the case. 2 days into the move, Rachel suddenly doubled over, screaming and clutching her stomach while we were carrying boxes, and when she yelled about appendix pain, Mom went completely white because their medical knowledge came from outdated books. Dad finally agreed to take her to the emergency room after she started writhing on the floor, and I watched them speed away knowing Rachel was faking the whole thing perfectly. The second their car turned the corner, I called Diana and told her about Mrs. Patterson's cameras, and she said she'd be there in 15 minutes with someone who could help. A van pulled up and Diana jumped out with a tall guy who introduced himself as Trevor, Lucas's uncle who worked in IT, and they followed me to where I could point out Mrs. Patterson's house from our window. Trevor pulled out a laptop and started typing rapidly, while explaining he could access cloud storage if we got close enough to her Wi-Fi, and Diana kept watch while I stood there with my heart hammering against my ribs. We crept along the side of Mrs. Patterson's house where Trevor connected to her network, and his fingers flew across the keyboard pulling up file after file of security footage from the past month. I leaned over his shoulder as he scrolled through timestamps and suddenly froze when Archie's mail truck appeared on screen from 3 weeks before the accident, with Mrs. Patterson cornering him by her car and jabbing her finger in his face. The timestamp jumped to the day of the accident and my stomach dropped as we watched Mrs. Patterson sitting in her white Hyundai at 1:47 p.m. drinking from a wine bottle while holding up her phone recording herself laughing at something. Trevor saved everything to 3 different drives while Diana watched the footage of Mrs. Patterson clearly drunk just 13 minutes before she hit Lucas. And we all knew this changed everything. We heard a car approaching and I sprinted back inside just as my parents' car pulled into the driveway with Rachel, who gave me the tiniest thumbs up while Mom ranted about incompetent doctors who couldn't find anything wrong. That night, Trevor sent me files that made my stomach drop because there were 2 other kids hit by white Hyundais in the past 3 years, and both cases went cold after the sergeant took over the investigations. The next morning, 3 black SUVs pulled into our driveway, and federal agents surrounded our house while Dad scrambled to lock all the doors, but they had warrants. They brought us all into the living room where an agent explained that the sergeant had been covering for his wife's drunk driving for years, and Lucas wasn't her first victim. What makes me wonder is how Archie just happened to create this whole sign language system out of nowhere. Was he always planning to teach someone through a window? My hands shook as I realized we'd stumbled into something way bigger than one accident. The doorbell rang and Diana walked in with Archie right behind her, and seeing him without glass between us felt like stepping into another dimension. He signed and spoke at the same time, telling me I'd saved his job and gotten justice for Lucas, while my parents sat frozen, refusing to even look at them. The agent explained that Rachel and I would need to testify before a grand jury about everything we'd witnessed and documented. My parents stayed rigid in their chairs like they were trying to disappear into the furniture. The front door opened again and Trevor Williams entered with a woman whose eyes were red and puffy from crying. Linda Williams walked straight to me with tears streaming down her face and wrapped her arms around me, saying thank you for speaking up when nobody else would listen. It was the first time anyone outside my family had ever hugged me, and my whole body went stiff, not knowing how to respond. Dad jumped up suddenly announcing we were leaving and nobody could force us to stay, but the agent pulled out more papers. He explained that Rachel and I were under federal protection until the trial, and Child Protective Services had been notified about our isolation. Mom's face went white as the agent said we'd be placed in temporary foster care while CPS investigated our living situation. 2 days later, Rachel and I were sitting in Diana's kitchen while she showed us how to use a cell phone properly. Every normal thing felt impossible, like ordering food from a menu or talking to the cashier at the store. Rachel picked it up fast and was already playing with the neighbor kids while I watched from the window, still scared to go outside without permission. At night, I couldn't sleep in a room without locks because the freedom felt wrong, like I was breaking rules just by existing. Diana tried teaching me basic stuff like how to introduce myself to people or make small talk, but my brain kept freezing up. 3 weeks later, we sat in a big room with wood panels on the walls while I testified for 3 hours about the sign language and finding the security footage. My voice got stronger with each answer, and Rachel testified about how we'd never been allowed to leave the house or talk to anyone. The grand jury voted to indict both the sergeant and his wife on multiple charges, including obstruction of justice and vehicular manslaughter. The next morning, cops surrounded Mrs. Patterson's house while neighbors gathered on their lawns to watch. She screamed that those terrorist kids were lying and setting her up as they put her in handcuffs. At the police station, other officers watched in silence as the sergeant was arrested at his own desk. The news cameras caught everything as they dragged him out in handcuffs while his former buddies wouldn't even look at him. Over the next few weeks, our lives changed completely. Rachel started going to regular school for the first time and discovered she was really good at arguing with people. She joined the debate team after just 2 weeks and won her first competition by the end of the month. The coach pulled me aside after watching her destroy 3 seniors in practice rounds. He said she had natural talent most kids never develop. Rachel told me later that all those years of silent arguments with me had trained her brain differently. She could see multiple sides of everything instantly and counter any point before her opponent finished making it. Meanwhile, our parents sat in separate jail cells waiting for their own trials to start. Dad requested a supervised meeting with us after 3 weeks inside. We sat across from him in a small gray room while a social worker watched from the corner. His hands shook as he looked at us, and I noticed how much weight he'd lost already. He told us he'd failed as a father and let fear control our whole family. He said Mom's paranoia had infected him slowly over the years until he couldn't see how wrong it all was. Mom refused to meet with us because she still believed she'd done nothing wrong. The prosecutor handling the Patterson case called me in for another meeting that same week. She had news that made my stomach drop. My parents were being investigated for child abuse and educational neglect by the state. The prosecutor said Rachel and I might have to testify against them too. Everything kept getting worse instead of better. Diana started visiting us at the group home twice a week to help me study for my GED test. She brought practice books and sat with me for hours going over math and science I'd never learned properly. She kept telling me I was brilliant and that my parents couldn't stop my mind from growing even locked in that house. The test itself was easier than I expected after all her help. My scores came back high enough for college admission, which felt impossible considering where I'd started. Diana hugged me so hard when we got the results that I couldn't breathe for a second. 3 months after Lucas died, his mom Linda asked if I wanted to visit his grave with her. I wasn't sure I could handle it, but something made me say yes. We stood there in the cemetery while she told me about her son. He'd been learning sign language at school to talk to his deaf cousin who lived in California. The coincidence hit me so hard I had to sit down on the grass. This little boy who died had been learning the same language that saved me. Linda showed me videos on her phone of him practicing his signs with such concentration on his tiny face. The trial finally started 6 months after that terrible day. The courthouse was packed with reporters and angry neighbors who'd known the Pattersons for years. I took the stand on the first day feeling stronger than I ever had before. Months of therapy had helped me find my voice even though my hands still shook. Mrs. Patterson's lawyer tried to make me look crazy because of how I was raised. He kept asking if I really understood what I'd seen since I'd been isolated my whole life. The prosecutor objected over and over while I stayed calm and repeated exactly what happened. I described every detail from the white Hyundai speeding away to Diana signing the license plate number. The jury watched me carefully, and I could see some of them taking notes. Archie testified the next day about teaching me sign language through the window. He explained how Mrs. Patterson had threatened him multiple times for talking to our family. The prosecutor played security footage from the liquor store showing Mrs. Patterson buying wine 20 minutes before the accident. Then came the Instagram video her friend had posted of them doing shots in her kitchen an hour before Lucas died. The jury looked sick watching it, especially when the timestamp appeared on screen. Rachel sat in the gallery the whole time signing encouragement to me whenever I looked over. Our secret language that we'd hidden for so long was helping put a killer in prison. Even Mom watched from her spot in the back row, and I saw something change in her face when Rachel signed "I love you" to me. Mrs. Patterson took the stand on day 3 claiming I was lying because my parents had programmed me to hate normal Americans. She said we were terrorists who wanted to destroy good Christian families like hers. The prosecutor destroyed her with the security footage from the intersection showing her car running the red light. The video was so clear you could see her looking at her phone instead of the road. Then came the evidence about her husband trying to cover everything up. The prosecutor had hundreds of emails between the sergeant and other officers about changing reports. He'd threatened 3 different cops who wanted to investigate properly and destroyed the original accident report. The conspiracy went all the way up to the deputy chief who'd been taking bribes for years. During the lunch recess, I ended up in the witness waiting room with 3 other people who'd all tried to report Mrs. Patterson before. The first guy showed me his police report from 6 months ago when she'd sideswiped his car while drunk at noon. The cops never followed up. The second woman had dashcam footage of Mrs. Patterson running a red light and almost hitting a family in a crosswalk. She'd sent it to the police department 4 times. The third person was an elderly man whose granddaughter went to school with Lucas. He'd complained to the principal table about Mrs. Patterson picking up her own kids while obviously drunk, but nothing happened. We all sat there realizing that if anyone had listened to us, Lucas would still be alive. When court resumed for closing arguments, the prosecutor stood up and pointed right at me. He called me a hero who broke free from imprisonment to save lives. He said my courage exposed not just one drunk driver, but an entire corrupt system. The defense attorney tried to paint me as a manipulated child seeking attention. She said I was confused and traumatized by my upbringing. She claimed Diana had coached me to lie for sympathy. Every word felt like a slap, but I kept my eyes on the photo of Lucas they'd put on the evidence table. That little boy deserved justice no matter what they said about me. The jury left to deliberate and we all filed out. In the hallway, I found myself standing next to a girl about my age. She introduced herself as Amy, Trevor Wilson's daughter. Her dad was the witness who'd tried to help Lucas. We started talking about normal things like college and what we wanted to study. She was going to Michigan State for engineering. I told her I'd applied to University of Michigan for social work. It hit me that I could actually imagine a future now. I could see myself in classes and making friends and living a normal life. The jury took 2 whole days to decide. Diana kept me and Rachel busy with cooking lessons and shopping trips and movie nights. We made homemade pizza and watched comedies and painted our nails. Lucas learning sign language to talk to his deaf cousin while the same language ended up exposing his killer. That's the kind of plot twist that makes you believe the universe has a really dark sense of humor. She was building us a new kind of family from scratch. We were learning how to be normal teenagers. On the second afternoon, the bailiff called us back. The courtroom was packed. Mrs. Patterson sat there looking small and scared while her husband, the sergeant, just stared at the table. The judge asked if the jury had reached a verdict. The foreman stood up and said yes. Guilty on all counts for Mrs. Patterson. 25 years for vehicular homicide, DUI, and conspiracy to obstruct justice. Guilty on all counts for the sergeant. 20 years for corruption, evidence tampering, and conspiracy. The courtroom exploded. People were crying and cheering at the same time. Linda Moore, Lucas's mom, collapsed into her chair sobbing with relief. I went over and held her while she cried. She grabbed my hands and whispered that I'd given Lucas justice. Across the room, Archie was signing to me from the gallery. You found your voice, his hand said. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed us immediately. Cameras and microphones pushed toward my face from every direction. I froze at first, my old training kicking in. Then I remembered I didn't have to be silent anymore. I looked straight at the cameras and spoke clearly. A child died because adults failed him. I just told the truth. My voice didn't shake at all. A week later, we sat in a CPS office while they read their final ruling. My parents would need to complete extensive counseling and parenting classes before any unsupervised contact with us. Rachel and I would remain with Diana indefinitely. Mom and Dad sat across from us looking defeated. They'd fought it at first, but their lawyer told them they'd lose. The next day, a thick envelope arrived from the University of Michigan. Diana and Rachel watched as I opened it. Full scholarship based on my GED scores and extraordinary circumstances. They wanted me to study social work to help other isolated children. I'd written about my experience in my application essay. Rachel hugged me so hard I couldn't breathe. 2 weeks later, we had our first supervised visit with our parents. The social worker sat in the corner taking notes while we talked. Mom looked different somehow, smaller. She started crying halfway through, and for the first time in my life, she admitted she was wrong. I was so afraid of the world hurting you that I hurt you myself, she said. Dad nodded beside her. They'd been going to therapy 3 times a week. The therapist was helping them understand how their fear had turned into abuse. It was just the first step, but it was something. 3 weeks later, I found Archie on his mail route 2 blocks from our old house, and my hands shook as I approached him for the first time outside of signing through glass. He looked up from sorting letters, and his whole face broke into this huge smile that made me realize how much he'd been worrying about me since everything happened. You saved my life, I told him, and watched him shake his head immediately. You saved your own life. I just showed you a window existed. He pulled me into this quick hug that smelled like mail truck vinyl and aftershave before heading back to work, and I stood there on the sidewalk feeling like maybe I could actually do this whole existing in the world thing. Rachel's debate tournament came 4 months later, and watching her stand at that podium arguing about religious freedom versus child welfare made my chest hurt in the best way possible. Mom and Dad sat 3 rows behind me, and I could see Mom's hands twisted together in her lap as Rachel explained how isolation isn't protection and how faith shouldn't require cutting yourself off from humanity. The judges gave her first place, and when she walked off that stage, Dad actually stood up and clapped even though his face looked like he was working through some serious internal stuff. Community college started that fall, and I picked morning classes thinking fewer people would be around, but the parking lot was still packed at 7:30, and I sat in my car for 20 minutes before finally walking into that building. The first few weeks were rough, and I'd find spots in empty hallways between classes just to breathe, but by December I'd made 2 friends who didn't mind that I sometimes went quiet or needed to step outside when rooms got too crowded. Trevor, the family therapist, had us all sitting in his office every Thursday, and those sessions were hard with Dad admitting he'd used religion to control us, and Mom crying about how her own childhood trauma made her think walls were the only way to keep us safe. Trust was going to take years to rebuild, but at least we were talking now instead of just following rules nobody questioned. 6 months after the trial, Diana asked if I wanted to help at the Deaf Advocacy Center, and that first day teaching sign language to other isolated teens felt like coming full circle. This girl Sarah showed up with the same scared look I probably had that day. I ran outside, and when she signed thank you after our session, I had to excuse myself to the bathroom to get it together. Diana found me there and just held me while I processed that maybe something good could come from all the bad. Lucas's elementary school invited us to the Memorial Garden dedication, and seeing that plaque reading "Justice Through Truth" while his classmates sang some song about friendship made Rachel grab my hand so tight it hurt. We stood there as part of the community for the first time, and nobody stared at us like we were weird or different, and his mom came over to thank us again, even though we kept telling her we just did what anyone should do. Dad got a job at Ace Hardware 6 months later, and watching him learn to work a register and talk to customers about drill bits was surreal after years of him hiding in his office. Mom still struggled more, and some days she couldn't leave the house, but she'd started going to the support group for religious trauma survivors, and last week she actually went grocery shopping alone. Diana had us over for dinner every Sunday, and watching me and Rachel sign across her table while eating her famous pot roast felt so normal now, even though a year ago we were doing it in secret terror. We'd taught Diana's daughter Emma our old secret signs, and she'd added her own, and sometimes the 4 of us would have entire conversations without making a sound just because we could. The letter came on a Tuesday, and seeing my story in some newspaper had apparently helped this girl in Texas, whose parents had similar rules, and she wrote that I'd given her hope that there was life beyond those walls. I wrote her back immediately and told her about the Advocacy Center and gave her resources, and Diana helped me set up this whole correspondence program for isolated kids reaching out. Standing at the University of Michigan campus that next fall with my acceptance letter in my hand felt impossible, but there I was with Rachel waving from Diana's car and my own dorm key, and a class schedule that included Introduction to Social Work, because maybe I could help other kids trapped behind windows. I wasn't that girl watching life happen anymore, and I wasn't even the girl who ran outside to save someone, because now I was just Maya, and that was enough. And as I walked toward the registration building, I didn't look back once. Thanks for letting me wonder along with you through all this. It's definitely been interesting spending this time together. Until next time, like the video. It helps more than you think.